I'm Mackenzie Reynolds, 32, and I'm staring at my investment account balance. $9,207,643.18. Sitting in my parents' rented mansion during our annual family gathering, I don't notice my sister Amber peering over my shoulder until she gasps loudly. Every head turns our way. Years of mockery about my thrift store clothes and cheap lifestyle flash through my mind as all eyes dart between my phone screen and my shocked sister's face. The secret I'd kept for a decade was about to explode in the faces of the family who never thought I was worth anything. Before I dive into how I got here, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you the most. Trust me, what happens next in this story might just give you the inspiration you need to prove your own doubters wrong. Growing up in the Reynolds family meant growing up with privilege. The kind that comes with expectations heavier than the chandeliers hanging in our 3-story colonial home in Greenwich, Connecticut. My father, Richard, was a third-generation investment banker who measured success in acquisitions and assets. My mother, Diane, was a socialite whose calendar was perpetually filled with charity galas and country club luncheons. Then there were my siblings. Ryan, the golden firstborn son who was groomed to take over the family business since he could walk, and Amber, Daddy's princess, whose shopping sprees were considered investment in appearances. And then there was me. From the beginning, I was different. While Amber collected designer handbags, I collected books. While Ryan networked with future business connections at prep school, I taught myself coding languages in our home library. My parents viewed my interests with a mixture of confusion and disappointment. "Mackenzie, darling," my mother would say, examining my plain ponytail with thinly veiled disapproval, "wouldn't you rather join Amber at the salon? First impressions are everything in our circle." My father was more direct. "The Reynolds name means something in this town. Your appearance reflects on all of us." I tried to please them. I wore the itchy designer dresses to their business dinners. I attended the cotillion classes. I smiled politely at the sons of my father's business associates when they were seated next to me at family events. But my heart wasn't in it. What I truly loved was the satisfaction of watching my savings grow. From age 8, I squirreled away my allowance, birthday money, and later, babysitting earnings in a special lockbox hidden under my bed. By 13, I'd saved just over $3,000, a fortune to me. I had a plan. Stanford University offered a summer coding camp for high school students. If I could attend early, I'd have an edge for when I applied to colleges. The brochure for the camp sat on my desk for weeks before I gathered the courage to show my parents. I rehearsed my pitch, complete with a handwritten cost-benefit analysis and a schedule of classes. My father barely glanced at my materials when I presented them at Sunday brunch. $3,000 for computer games? He chuckled, passing the brochure to my mother, who set it aside without looking at it. "It's not games, Dad. It's coding. Algorithmic development. The same kind of programs that power your trading platforms at work," I explained, my voice rising with enthusiasm despite the dismissive looks. Speaking of expenses, my mother interjected, turning to my father, "Amber's Sweet 16 is next month, and the venue requires the deposit by Friday." I felt the familiar pit in my stomach as my father's expression shifted. He looked at me with that smile, the one that meant I was about to learn another lesson about family priorities. "Mackenzie, you're always so good with your money. So responsible," he began, and I already knew what was coming. "We're a bit overextended with the new boat and Amber's party. How about you loan us that computer camp money? We'll pay you back with interest, a real investment lesson." The betrayal wasn't in the asking, it was in the knowledge that there would never be repayment. It was in the way Amber smirked behind her orange juice glass. It was in Ryan's condescending pat on my shoulder as he whispered, "That's how it works around here, sis. Team player." I handed over my savings the next day, watching as my mother casually added it to the check for Amber's party venue. My dreams of Stanford summer camp disappeared, replaced by serving punch at Amber's Great Gatsby-themed Sweet 16. 2 months later, when I tentatively asked about repayment, my father looked genuinely confused. That money went to a family priority, Mackenzie. Your sister's milestone birthday, he said, as if explaining a simple concept to a small child. Besides, coding isn't very ladylike. You should be focusing on activities that will help you find a suitable husband. The final blow came when he added, "You'll never understand money like a Reynolds should. Best leave the financial decisions to those with the aptitude for it." That night, I moved my lockbox from under my bed to a hollowed-out copy of Pride and Prejudice on my bookshelf. I started a new savings account at a different bank than my parents used, and I learned my first valuable lesson about wealth. Those who talk about it the most often have the least secure grasp on it. From that day forward, I kept my financial ambitions to myself, burying them as deeply as I buried my hurt. But unlike the hurt, my ambitions continued to grow, silently and steadily, just waiting for the right moment to bloom. 4 years of strategic planning got me exactly where I wanted to be: Stanford University with a partial merit scholarship for computer science. The scholarship covered about 60% of my tuition, but even with my secret savings, I needed help with the remainder. I presented my acceptance letter to my parents over dinner, carefully outlining the prestigious nature of the program and the career opportunities it would open. My father looked unimpressed as he cut into his steak. Stanford is certainly acceptable, but computer science? What exactly is your endgame here, Mackenzie? Tech is the future, Dad. The algorithms I want to develop could revolutionize investment strategies. The crossover potential with finance is enormous, I explained, trying to frame my passion in terms he might respect. My mother sipped her wine thoughtfully. Wouldn't business administration be more suitable? Or economics? Ryan, home from his senior year at Yale, chimed in. CS grads are a dime a dozen now, Mac. Everyone thinks they'll be the next Silicon Valley wonderkind. After 3 hours of negotiation that felt more like an inquisition, we reached a compromise. My parents would pay the remaining tuition if I added business as a minor, and agreed to at least consider joining Reynolds Investment Group after graduation. I agreed, knowing that the real value would be in the computer science courses and the connections I'd make. Stanford was everything I had hoped for and more. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who valued intellect over appearance, innovation over tradition. My roommate, Julia Chen, became my first true friend. A fashion design major with a minor in accounting, Julia introduced me to thrift shopping. Not out of necessity, but as an ethical and creative choice. Fast fashion is killing our planet, she explained as we browsed through a secondhand store near campus. Plus, the craftsmanship in vintage pieces is incredible. Feel this stitching. Under Julia's guidance, I discovered my own style, classic, comfortable, and completely disconnected from the designer labels my mother insisted were necessary for success. I found liberation in $5 cashmere sweaters and perfectly broken-in jeans. More importantly, I found that dressing for myself rather than for others freed up mental energy for what really mattered: my work. And that work was thriving. By junior year, I was developing an algorithm that could analyze market trends and predict investment opportunities with remarkable accuracy. My advisor, Dr. Torres, encouraged me to pursue it as my senior project. "This has commercial potential, Mackenzie," he told me after reviewing my initial results. "You're combining traditional market analysis with behavioral economics in a way I haven't seen before." I worked on my algorithm day and night during senior year, refining its predictive capabilities and testing it against historical market data. By graduation, I had a working prototype that outperformed most professional trading strategies in backtesting scenarios. With my diploma in hand and my algorithm ready for real-world application, I returned home, prepared to fulfill my obligation to consider the family business. I spent 2 weeks polishing my presentation, creating detailed slides showing how my algorithm could give Reynolds Investment Group a competitive edge in the market. This was my chance to prove my worth to my family on their terms, with numbers, projections, and profit potential. The day of my presentation, I arrived at the Reynolds Investment Group offices downtown, dressed in a thrifted but impeccable Burberry suit that had cost me $35. My father had arranged for me to present to the executive team, himself, Ryan, who had joined the firm after Yale, and the firm's senior partners. I was 5 minutes into my presentation when I noticed my father checking his watch. By the 10-minute mark, two partners were openly scrolling through their phones. Only Mr. Abernathy, the oldest partner and my father's mentor, seemed genuinely engaged with my data. As you can see, I continued, pointing to a graph showing prediction accuracy rates. When applied to last quarter's market conditions, the algorithm would have increased portfolio yields by approximately 4.3% compared to traditional strategies. Mackenzie, my father interrupted, not bothering to look at my carefully prepared slides. This is all very academic. But in the real world, investment is about relationships, intuition, and experience. No computer program can replace the human element. With all due respect, Dad, that's exactly what my algorithm accounts for. The behavioral economics that drive market psychology. It's not replacing the human element, it's quantifying it. Ryan snorted. Quantifying it? Listen to yourself, Mac. You sound like you've spent too much time in that California tech bubble. My father nodded. Ryan has a point. This is amateur work at best. You've spent 4 years developing what is essentially a sophisticated calculator. The dismissal stung, but I wasn't ready to give up. If you just look at the test results, I think we've seen enough, my father said, standing up. Gentlemen, let's break for lunch. Mackenzie, why don't you join HR this afternoon? We could use someone with your people skills in our recruiting division. Entry level, of course. But there's room for growth. The laughter was subtle. Just a few chuckles and knowing glances. But it echoed in my ears, as if the entire room were mocking me. 4 years of education, thousands of hours of work, and my own father couldn't be bothered to give my ideas 15 minutes of genuine consideration. Mr. Abernathy approached me as the room cleared out. Your data is sound, he said quietly. But some men would rather fail their own way than succeed with someone else's innovation, especially if that someone is their daughter. I gathered my materials with shaking hands. Ryan lingered by the door, his expression a mixture of pity and smugness. Don't take it personally, Mac. Dad's just trying to protect you from failure. Why don't you take the HR position? It comes with benefits, and you could use some real-world experience before trying to revolutionize anything. I looked at my brother, Yale-educated, groomed for success, and completely blind to his own limitations, and made a decision that would change the course of my life. No thank you, I said, walking past him toward the elevator. I think I'll revolutionize things on my own terms. The one-bedroom apartment I found in Palo Alto was barely 500 square feet, with faded carpet and a kitchenette that doubled as a laundry room. It cost more per month than a luxury condo would in most other cities, but it was walking distance to the bus line that would take me to my new job at DataSphere, a mid-sized tech company that had offered me a data analyst position after a series of intense interviews. My starting salary was decent $78,000 per year plus benefits, but modest by Silicon Valley standards. My colleagues complained about the cost of living, lamenting their inability to save for houses or retirement while maintaining the lifestyle they felt they deserved. I took a different approach. While they leased new cars and rented trendy apartments in San Francisco, I found 2 roommates to share housing costs. While they ordered DoorDash and dined at fusion restaurants, I meal prepped on Sundays and ate the same lunch at my desk 5 days a week. While they shopped at boutiques and department stores, I continued refining my thrift store expertise, building a professional wardrobe that looked expensive but cost pennies on the dollar. Don't you ever want to treat yourself? My coworker Liam asked one day, noticing me brown bagging it again while the team ordered sushi. I am treating myself, I replied, just not in ways that are immediately visible. What none of them knew, what no one knew, was that I was still developing my algorithm on nights and weekends. 3 months after starting at DataSphere, I had refined it enough to start investing real money. My grandmother had given each grandchild $20,000 upon college graduation. Ryan used his for a down payment on a BMW. Amber funded a 2-week shopping trip to Paris. I invested every penny through a small, independent brokerage firm. My strategy was simple but disciplined. I focused primarily on emerging green technology companies, ethical businesses with solid fundamentals, and long-term value investments rather than quick trades. My algorithm helped me identify patterns that others missed, spotting opportunities weeks before they became obvious to the market. My first year's returns exceeded my wildest expectations. Nearly 400% growth. My initial $20,000 grew to just over $95,000, and I reinvested all of it. Meanwhile, I continued living frugally, putting 80% of my salary into my investment account after covering basic necessities. The pattern continued as months turned into years. My work at DataSphere was noticed, earning me 2 promotions within 18 months. With each salary increase, my investment contributions grew, but my lifestyle remained largely unchanged. My roommates eventually moved out to live with significant others, but rather than upgrading to a better apartment, I found new roommates, graduate students who were rarely home and didn't mind my odd hours. Family gatherings became increasingly awkward as the divide between my life and my family's expectations widened. Thanksgiving and Christmas visits were punctuated by comments about my appearance, my car, a used Honda I'd purchased for cash, and my apparent failure to launch in their eyes. Still shopping at Goodwill? I see, Amber remarked during one holiday dinner, eyeing my vintage cashmere sweater. Don't they pay you at that tech company? Mackenzie is just going through her rebellious phase, my mother explained to her friends at their annual New Year's party. Some girls get tattoos. My daughter pretends to be poor. The nickname Thrift Store Girl began as a joke from Ryan during a family vacation I'd reluctantly joined. It stuck, becoming their shorthand for my perceived eccentricity. Ryan's wife, Jessica, who'd never liked me, took particular pleasure in spotting me in thrift store finds. "Is that a second-hand dress at your cousin's wedding?" She'd whisper loud enough for others to hear. Once, she even surreptitiously took photos of me at a family function and posted them on social media with the hashtag Thrift Store Girl, tagging mutual acquaintances. I didn't bother explaining that my cheap dress was actually a vintage Chanel I'd found for $40, or that the shabby briefcase I carried was artisan-made leather that would outlast their mass-produced designer bags. I simply smiled and changed the subject, knowing that my bank balance was speaking a truth they couldn't hear. By the 3-year mark at DataSphere, I had been promoted to senior data scientist, and my investment portfolio had crossed the $1 million threshold. I celebrated by taking Julia to dinner, the one person who knew the truth about my financial situation, and donating to a women's coding scholarship. "You could buy a mansion in cash and rub it in their faces," Julia said over dessert, having listened to me recount the latest barbs from my family. I shook my head. That's exactly what they would do. Use money to prove a point. I'm not interested in proving anything to them anymore. What I didn't say was that I was still smarting from their dismissal of my work. Every successful investment validated my algorithm, the very technology my father had dismissed as amateur. Each dollar added to my net worth was both a silent vindication and a private satisfaction. My strategy continued to evolve as my knowledge deepened. I began diversifying more aggressively, adding international investments and some carefully selected real estate through REITs. I started angel investing in women-led startups, particularly those founded by women of color who had innovative ideas but limited access to traditional capital. Everything was proceeding according to my private plan until a call from my mother disrupted my carefully constructed equilibrium. My grandmother Eleanor, the only family member who had ever truly supported my independence, had been diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. The doctors recommended an experimental treatment not covered by insurance, and the family needed to make decisions quickly. As I hung up the phone, I looked at my investment account balance, $517,839.42. More than enough to help the woman who had believed in me when no one else did. But to do so would mean revealing at least part of my financial secret to a family that had never taken me seriously. The Reynolds family emergency meeting was held in my parents' living room, with the gravity of the situation reflected in the absence of cocktails and hors d'oeuvres that typically accompanied family gatherings. My grandmother Eleanor sat in her usual armchair, somehow looking both frailer and more dignified than I had ever seen her. At 78, she had always been the family matriarch, sharp-minded, outspoken, and the only person who could truly keep my father in check. The treatment is called immunotherapy, my father explained, reviewing the documents from the oncologist. It's experimental, but it's shown promising results in cases like Mom's. And it costs $175,000, my mother added, her voice hushed as if the amount itself were obscene. Insurance won't cover experimental treatments. I watched as my family processed this information. Ryan immediately began talking about the tax implications, whether the expense could be structured as a loan, and how it might affect their year-end finances. Amber was quieter, occasionally glancing at our grandmother with what looked like genuine concern, though she kept checking her phone every few minutes. We could take out a second mortgage on the house, my father suggested, looking tired. The interest rates aren't ideal right now, but it's the quickest option. I cleared my throat. I can help with the costs. The room fell silent, then erupted in uncomfortable laughter. My father looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. That's sweet, Mackenzie, but this is a significant amount of money we're talking about. I'm aware of the amount, I said evenly. I can contribute. Ryan snorted. What are you going to do? Sell your used clothes collection? Or maybe she has a secret sugar daddy funding her minimalist lifestyle, Amber added with a smirk. My mother gave them a sharp look, then turned to me with forced patience. Darling, we appreciate the gesture, but this is something the adults will handle. I was 30 years old, with a portfolio worth over $500,000, being dismissed as a child. I looked at my grandmother, who was watching the exchange with a shrewd expression I couldn't quite read. I have money saved, I insisted. Enough to help significantly. Mackenzie, my father's voice took on the patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. Your idea of significant and the reality of medical costs are very different things. A few $1,000s isn't going to make a dent in a $175,000 treatment. I wanted to tell them. In that moment, I wanted to pull out my phone, log into my investment account, and show them exactly how wrong they'd been about me all these years. But something held me back. The certainty that they would find a way to make my success about them, or worse, try to gain control of what I'd built independently. Let's focus on realistic solutions, my father continued, effectively ending my participation in the conversation. I made my decision that night. The next morning, I contacted the hospital's financial department directly and arranged to cover the entire cost of my grandmother's treatment anonymously. The payment was structured as a private foundation grant specifically for her case. The hospital administrator seemed to understand my need for discretion and assured me that while the treatment would be fully covered, the source would remain confidential. 2 weeks later, my grandmother began her treatment. The family credited the miraculous grant to my father's business connections or possibly my mother's charity work. Neither considered that I might have been responsible. It's all about who you know, my father boasted at a family dinner celebrating the start of Grandma Eleanor's treatment. A lifetime of building the right relationships pays off when you need it most. I said nothing, content in the knowledge that I had done right by the one person who had always seen my potential. Grandmother improved steadily over the next few months, defying the initial grim prognosis. By her birthday in October, she was well enough to host a small celebration at her home. I arrived early to help set up, finding my grandmother already in the kitchen arranging flowers. You shouldn't be on your feet so much, I scolded gently, taking the vase from her hands. Nonsense. Being useful keeps me alive, she replied, her eyes twinkling. Besides, I wanted a moment alone with you before the vultures descend. I smiled at her characterization of the family. You're feeling better. Good enough to know when something doesn't add up. She fixed me with a penetrating stare. That grant was awfully convenient, wasn't it? I busied myself with the flowers. Sometimes the universe provides. And sometimes granddaughters who are smarter than anyone gives them credit for provide. She patted my hand. Your secret is safe with me, whatever it is. I just want you to know that I see you, Mackenzie. I always have. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Ryan and Amber, arguing loudly about who would get to use the family's vacation home for New Year's. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment away from their bickering. As I passed the study, I overheard their voices drift through the partially open door. We need to talk to Dad about changing Grandma's will before she gets any worse, Amber was saying in a hushed tone. She's got that collection of vintage jewelry that's worth a fortune. I know, Ryan replied. I've already mentioned it to him. He agrees we should protect the assets from being distributed unwisely. God forbid Thrift Store Girl gets an equal share, Amber laughed. She wouldn't know what to do with money anyway. She'd probably donate it to some homeless shelter or whatever her latest charity obsession is. Let's be realistic. Ryan's voice turned serious. We're the ones who've been here, building careers that honor the family name. Mackenzie opted out. She shouldn't expect the same benefits. I stood frozen in the hallway, a familiar, hollow feeling expanding in my chest. Even now, with my grandmother fighting for her life, they were plotting to manipulate her legacy. The worst part was their certainty that I was financially incompetent, so entrenched in their narrative about me that they couldn't conceive of any alternative reality. I walked back to the kitchen, where my grandmother was now sitting with a cup of tea, looking out at her garden. For the first time, I wondered if she had faced similar battles in her life, if the quiet strength she exuded came from weathering storms like the one now surrounding me. "Everything all right, dear?" she asked, noticing my expression. "Just family being family," I replied with a tight smile. She nodded knowingly. "Remember, Mackenzie, the true measure of wealth isn't in what you have, but in what you can afford to lose without losing yourself." As the rest of the family arrived and the celebration began, I kept her words close, wondering how much more I could afford to lose before I would be forced to show my hand. 3 years after my grandmother's successful treatment, my professional life had evolved dramatically. My work at DataSphere had earned me a reputation as an innovative problem solver, particularly in predictive analytics. Meanwhile, my investment portfolio had grown to $2.3 million, a fact I still kept fiercely private. I maintained my frugal lifestyle, though I had finally upgraded to a small, one-bedroom apartment of my own. My wardrobe still came primarily from thrift and vintage stores. My car was the same reliable Honda, and I continued to practice the financial discipline that had served me well. My algorithm had continued to evolve, becoming more sophisticated as I refined it with additional behavioral economic factors. I had even developed a user-friendly interface that could make it accessible to investment professionals who lacked technical backgrounds. Then came the email that would change everything. A recruitment message from Westlake Capital, one of the most prestigious investment firms in the country. Their head of innovation had somehow heard about my work in predictive analytics and wanted to discuss a senior position leading their digital transformation. The compensation package they hinted at was more than triple my current salary, with significant equity options. There was just one catch. They needed references from someone in the financial sector who could speak to my understanding of investment principles. Despite my business minor and self-education, my resume lacked formal financial experience. The only relevant connection I had was my father and the family business. After days of internal debate, I scheduled a visit home, hoping that enough time had passed for my father to see me as a professional equal. Perhaps the prestige of Westlake Capital would finally earn me his respect. I arrived at my parents' house on a Saturday afternoon, only to find it bustling with activity. Caterers moved efficiently through the kitchen. Florists arranged elaborate centerpieces, and my mother directed staff like a general commanding troops. "Mackenzie! I completely forgot you were coming today," she exclaimed when she spotted me in the foyer. "We're hosting a fundraiser for the hospital board tonight. Your father's being honored for his charitable contributions." The irony wasn't lost on me. My anonymous payment for grandmother's treatment being celebrated as my father's generosity, but I smiled politely. "I won't stay long. I just need to speak with Dad about something important." I found my father in his study, reviewing note cards for his speech. He greeted me with distracted civility, asking perfunctory questions about my job while continuing to mark up his notes. "Actually, Dad, that's what I wanted to discuss with you," I began, explaining the opportunity at Westlake Capital and the reference I needed. As I spoke, I noticed him becoming more engaged, setting his cards aside to focus on me. "Westlake Capital," he repeated, looking genuinely impressed for perhaps the first time in our relationship. "That's a serious firm, Mackenzie. Harvey Westlake doesn't suffer fools." "I know, that's why this opportunity means so much to me." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with new interest. "What position did they offer you?" "Director of Quantitative Analysis." I'd be building predictive models for their investment strategies and heading a team of data scientists. My father's expression shifted subtly. And you think you're qualified for this role? Westlake Capital manages billions in assets. Their strategies affect markets globally. Yes, I am qualified, I replied, maintaining eye contact. My algorithm has consistently outperformed market benchmarks for years. The same algorithm you dismissed without really examining. A flash of annoyance crossed his face. That little program from college? Mackenzie, there's a vast difference between academic exercises and real-world financial management. It wasn't just an academic exercise, Dad. I've been refining and implementing it for years now. It works. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Look, I appreciate your ambition, but I can't in good conscience recommend someone without proper financial experience for a position of this magnitude. You lack the foundational knowledge, the financial acumen. You've never even seen what I can do, I protested, frustration building. You dismissed my work without giving it a fair evaluation. Because I know this field, he countered. I've spent my entire career in finance. I can recognize when someone doesn't have the aptitude for it. At that moment, my mother entered the study. Richard, the Blakesleys just arrived early. You need to greet them. She glanced between us, sensing the tension. Everything okay? Mackenzie wants me to recommend her for a senior position at Westlake Capital, he explained. My mother's eyebrows shot up. Oh, darling, that's rather ambitious, isn't it? Wouldn't you be more comfortable in something more suitable? Perhaps their HR department? I'm qualified for the role they're considering me for, I insisted. Qualifications aren't everything, my mother replied with a patronizing smile. In these circles, it's about fit, about understanding the unspoken rules. Why not focus on finding a nice man who's already established? You're not getting any younger. And career women often struggle to balance family life. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. In the background, I could hear the voices of arriving guests, the clink of glasses, the carefully orchestrated sounds of wealth and influence. The family business has been struggling, I said quietly, changing tactics. I've heard rumors about client losses and cash flow issues. My father's face hardened. Office gossip from tech nerds. We're in a transitional period, that's all. Ryan lost the Henderson account last quarter, I pressed. That was 20% of your managed assets. How did you, my father began, then caught himself. A temporary setback. Ryan is implementing a new strategy. Let me help, I offered. Let me show you what my algorithms can do for portfolio management. I could analyze your current holdings, identify optimization opportunities. Enough. My father stood, straightening his tie. This is exactly the kind of overconfidence I'm talking about. You have a data job at a mid-level tech company and suddenly think you can advise a financial institution that's been operating successfully for 3 generations. Richard, the guests, my mother reminded him gently. He nodded, composing himself. Mackenzie, I cannot provide a reference for you. It would be professionally irresponsible and potentially damaging to relationships I've spent decades building. If you want to work at Westlake, apply for a position appropriate for your experience level. The dismissal was final. As he brushed past me to join his guests, I realized this was perhaps the most honest my father had ever been with me. He truly believed I was incapable of financial success, not because of any evidence, but because it didn't fit his narrative about who I was. As I drove away from my parents' house, I made a call to Julia, who now worked as a design director in New York. He refused, I said when she answered. Of course he did, she replied. What's plan B? I smiled grimly. I'm going straight to Harvey Westlake himself. My algorithm's performance metrics speak louder than any reference ever could. 2 weeks later, I sat across from Harvey Westlake, a legendary figure in investment banking, as he reviewed the documentation of my algorithm's 5-year performance history. These returns are exceptional, he said finally, looking up at me with shrewd eyes. Why haven't you patented this methodology? I wanted to perfect it first, I replied honestly. And I was waiting for the right opportunity to implement it at scale. He nodded thoughtfully. The position we discussed would typically require references from financial institutions. I understand that my background is unconventional, I acknowledged. But I believe my results demonstrate my capabilities more effectively than any reference letter. Harvey Westlake studied me for a long moment, then made a decision. I didn't build this firm by following conventional wisdom, Miss Reynolds. I built it by recognizing exceptional talent regardless of its packaging. He extended his hand. Welcome to Westlake Capital. As I shook his hand, I felt a weight lifting. The burden of seeking validation from people who were constitutionally incapable of providing it. I had finally found a path forward that didn't require my family's approval or understanding. What I didn't know then was that my family's financial situation was deteriorating faster than I had realized, setting the stage for their most brazen betrayal yet. 2 years into my tenure at Westlake Capital, life had taken on a rhythmic efficiency that suited me perfectly. My role as Director of Quantitative Analysis challenged me intellectually, while my personal investment portfolio, now worth just over $5 million, provided a sense of security I'd never known growing up. Despite my family's outward wealth, I had moved to a modest but comfortable condo in a good neighborhood, paid for in cash. I still shopped primarily at thrift and vintage stores, but now it was purely by choice rather than necessity. My algorithm, implemented across several of Westlake's fund strategies, had delivered consistent above-market returns, earning me the respect of colleagues who initially viewed my unorthodox background with skepticism. Contact with my family had become minimal, occasional phone calls with my grandmother, obligatory appearances at major holidays, and little else. I had created a life that functioned perfectly well without their approval or involvement. Then came the call from my father's assistant. A family emergency meeting was scheduled for the following weekend. Attendance was mandatory. No further details provided. I arrived at my parents' house on Saturday morning to find the atmosphere thick with tension. The usual ostentatious displays, fresh flowers, prepared hors d'oeuvres, premium liquor displayed prominently, were conspicuously absent. Instead, my father sat at the dining room table with stacks of documents before him, looking older than his 62 years. My mother paced near the windows, while Ryan studied a spreadsheet with uncharacteristic focus. Amber scrolled through her phone, her expression oscillating between boredom and worry. Grandmother Eleanor sat quietly in her usual chair, observing everyone with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Now that everyone's here, we can begin, my father announced as I took my seat. I'll be direct. Reynolds Investment Group is facing a liquidity crisis. The words hung in the air for a moment before Ryan jumped in with a practiced explanation about market volatility, unexpected client withdrawals, and a temporary cash flow situation. His jargon-heavy explanation couldn't disguise the fundamental truth. The family business was on the verge of collapse. The bottom line, my father continued when Ryan finally paused, is that we need an immediate capital infusion of $1.2 million to meet our obligations and retain our core clients. I waited for the proposed solution. A bank loan, liquidation of personal assets, perhaps even a strategic merger. But my father's next words took me completely by surprise. Mackenzie, we know you've done well at Westlake. You've probably saved a considerable amount, living the way you do. Every eye turned to me. Even Amber looked up from her phone, suddenly interested. I've been responsible with my finances, I said carefully, but I'm not sure what that has to do with the firm's situation. My father cleared his throat. We're proposing that you invest in the family business. We're offering you an equity position, 5% initially, with the potential for growth as the firm recovers. I blinked, momentarily stunned by the audacity of the request. After years of dismissing my financial abilities, they were now turning to me for rescue. I'd need to see the company financials before considering any investment, I replied, maintaining a neutral tone. Complete transparency, revenue streams, debt obligations, client stability. Of course, my father agreed too quickly. Ryan has prepared a comprehensive overview. Ryan slid a folder toward me. It's all in there, the essential figures. We're facing a short-term crisis, but the underlying business model is sound. I spent the next hour reviewing their documentation, asking pointed questions that visibly unsettled my father and brother. The picture that emerged was far worse than they had initially presented. The firm had been hemorrhaging clients for years. Ryan's innovative investment strategy had resulted in significant losses. Several key employees had departed, taking clients with them. The company wasn't just facing a liquidity crisis. It was fundamentally broken. "I'll need time to consider this," I said, finally. Closing the folder. "Time is precisely what we don't have," my father pressed. "We need an answer today. The transfer would need to be completed by Monday morning." "That's not how investment decisions work," I replied. "Due diligence requires—" "This is family, Mackenzie," my mother interrupted, "not some corporate transaction. Actually, you're the ones who've made it a corporate transaction by offering equity instead of just asking for help," I pointed out. My grandmother spoke for the first time. "She's right. You're asking her to make a business decision but expecting her to use family loyalty as the deciding factor." My father sighed heavily. "Fine. Take the weekend to review the materials. But we need your decision by Sunday night." I nodded and stood to leave. But Ryan followed me to the door with another folder. "There's just some standard paperwork to sign before you go. Confidentiality agreements, since you're reviewing proprietary information. And a preliminary authorization form, so we can expedite the process if you decide to move forward." I accepted the folder but didn't open it. "I'll review everything together." That night, in the quiet of my condo, I spread the documents across my dining table and began a thorough analysis. The financial situation was even more dire than I had initially assessed, but it was the preliminary authorization form that revealed their true intentions. Buried in the dense legal language was a power of attorney clause that would grant them significant control not just over the invested funds, but over all my financial affairs. The document referenced consolidated asset management and family office oversight, euphemisms for giving my father and Ryan control of my finances. I stared at the document, a cold realization settling over me. This wasn't just about saving the family business. They had figured out, or at least suspected, that I had significant assets. And this was their attempt to gain control of them under the guise of a family emergency. The next morning, I returned to my parents' house with my decision. The family was gathered in the living room, an atmosphere of nervous anticipation palpable in the air. "Have you made your decision?" my father asked without preamble. "I have," I replied, placing the folder on the coffee table. "I cannot invest in Reynolds Investment Group under the proposed terms." My father's face darkened. "This is your family's legacy we're talking about. I'm aware. And I would be willing to help, as a loan, not an equity investment, but only with significant restructuring of the firm's management and investment strategy." Ryan scoffed. "So you want to take over? Is that it? A few years at Westlake and suddenly you're Gordon Gekko?" "I want the business to survive," I countered. "But the current approach isn't working, and throwing money at it won't fix the structural problems." "What structural problems?" my father demanded. "For starters, the power of attorney clause hidden in the preliminary authorization paperwork," I said, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. "Did you really think I wouldn't read the fine print?" A tense silence fell over the room. My mother looked away, examining her manicure with sudden interest. Amber's eyes widened slightly. Apparently, she hadn't been privy to this particular detail. "That's standard language for this type of family investment," my father finally said, his tone defensive. "It's just business." "Just business," I repeated. Interesting how it becomes just business when you're trying to gain control of my assets. But it was just family when you were pressuring me to invest without proper due diligence. "You're being paranoid," Ryan interjected. "That clause is for administrative efficiency." I stood, gathering my things. "I won't be investing under these or any similar terms. And I strongly suggest you seek professional restructuring advice before approaching other potential investors." "You're turning your back on this family when we need you most," my father said, his voice hard. "After everything we've done for you." I paused at the door, looking back at the family that had never truly seen me. "What exactly have you done for me? Dismissed my ideas without consideration? Mocked my lifestyle choices? Called me Thrift Store Girl behind my back and sometimes to my face?" "We're trying to protect you from yourself," Amber said, speaking up for the first time. You're still just playing dress up in your thrift store clothes, pretending to understand a world that's beyond your depth. I smiled tightly. Goodbye. I wish you luck with the business. As I drove away, I felt an odd mixture of sadness and liberation. I had finally drawn a line they couldn't cross, protected what I had built for myself. It shouldn't have had to come to this, but perhaps it was always inevitable. 1 month later, I received a brief email from a former colleague who still had connections in the financial community. Reynolds Investment Group had filed for bankruptcy protection. The family legacy my father had invoked so passionately was gone. What I didn't anticipate was that rather than accepting responsibility for the firm's collapse, my father would find a way to blame me publicly within industry circles. The narrative he crafted, that I had abandoned the family legacy in its hour of need, spread quickly among his remaining connections. It was the ultimate betrayal. Not just attempting to gain control of my assets, but trying to destroy my professional reputation when that attempt failed. But he had underestimated me once again. My work at Westlake spoke for itself, and Harvey Westlake himself dismissed the rumors as petty family drama when they reached his ears. Still, the experience left me shaken, forcing me to confront just how far my family would go to maintain their control and narrative. It was time to protect myself more proactively from the people who should have protected me. The collapse of Reynolds Investment Group sent ripples through the social circles my parents had occupied for decades. Country club memberships lapsed. Charity board positions mysteriously became too demanding given other commitments. Invitations to galas and fundraisers dwindled, then stopped altogether. Meanwhile, my career continued its upward trajectory. My algorithm had become the cornerstone of Westlake Capital's most successful fund strategies, and I had been promoted to senior director with an expanded team under my leadership. I'd also developed a proprietary investment app that Westlake was preparing to license to other firms, an arrangement that would pay me substantial royalties for years to come. I kept tabs on my family primarily through my grandmother, whose health had stabilized following her treatment. She had moved from her large house into a comfortable assisted living community, a transition I had quietly helped finance when it became clear my parents could no longer contribute significantly to her care. They've had to sell the house, she informed me during one of our weekly phone calls. They're renting that place on Oakmont Drive now, still too big for what they need, but your mother insisted on having room for entertaining. Are they entertaining much these days? I asked, knowing the answer. Hardly. Most of their so-called friends scattered like leaves once the money ran out. Her voice held no bitterness, only pragmatic observation. That's how it goes in those circles. The relationships are transactional, though they pretend otherwise. I felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. My parents had built their entire identity around wealth and status. Losing both must have been devastating. Are they managing financially? I asked cautiously. They get by. Your father found a position advising a small regional bank. A significant step down, but it pays the bills. Your mother has taken up painting to fill her days. They're learning to live within more modest means, though not gracefully. And Ryan and Amber? My grandmother's sigh carried through the phone line. Ryan's working for a former client, some kind of junior portfolio manager. Amber moved in with them temporarily after her divorce. She's talking about starting a lifestyle blog, whatever that is. I absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the image of my imperious, confident siblings who had once seemed so securely positioned at the top of their respective social hierarchies. They don't discuss you if that's what you're wondering, my grandmother continued. Your name has become something of a taboo topic. I think that will change soon, though. Why is that? Because they're running out of options, dear. And people with few options eventually turn to those they've previously underestimated. Her prediction proved accurate sooner than either of us expected. 3 days later, my apartment's security desk called to inform me that my siblings were in the lobby, insisting on seeing me despite not having an appointment. I considered turning them away, but curiosity won out. I authorized the doorman to send them up, quickly scanning my living space through their potential eyes. My condo was comfortable but modest by Silicon Valley executive standards, clean lines, quality furnishings, but nothing ostentatious. The only truly expensive items were my bookshelf full of first editions and the original painting by an emerging artist that hung over my fireplace. The knock came moments later. I opened the door to find Ryan and Amber standing awkwardly in the hallway, both looking slightly diminished from their former selves. Ryan's designer suit appeared a season or two old, while Amber's handbag, once reliably the latest model from whatever designer was trending, was noticeably worn at the corners. "This is nice," Amber said as she stepped inside, her tone suggesting surprise that I wasn't living in squalor. "Cozy? Thank you," I replied neutrally. "Can I offer you something to drink? Water? Coffee?" "Nothing, thanks," Ryan answered quickly, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for visible signs of my financial status. "We wanted to talk to you in person. About the family situation." I gestured to the living room seating area. I gathered as much. "What's on your mind?" They exchanged glances before Ryan launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech about family unity, shared history, and the importance of supporting each other through difficult times. Amber nodded along, occasionally adding emotional embellishments about missing me and wanting to heal old wounds. I waited patiently for them to reach their actual point, which eventually emerged. They wanted money. Not a loan, not an investment, just cash, handed over in the name of family loyalty. "We've been through a rough patch," Ryan explained, leaning forward earnestly. "Dad's new position barely covers their mortgage. Amber's divorce settlement is tied up in court. I've got alimony payments from my first marriage eating half my salary." "That sounds challenging," I acknowledged. "What exactly are you hoping I'll do?" "We thought, since you're doing so well at Westlake, maybe you could help us get back on our feet," Amber said. "Just until things stabilize. Family helping family." "The way you helped me when I needed a reference for Westlake?" I asked quietly. "Or the way Dad helped me when I presented my algorithm to the family firm?" Ryan's expression hardened. "That's ancient history, Mac. We're talking about now. How much are you asking for?" They exchanged another glance. "We were thinking around $200,000, Ryan said, "to clear some debts and give us breathing room." I considered them for a long moment. "That's a substantial amount. What would be the repayment terms?" Amber had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Well, we hadn't really thought of it as something that would need formal repayment. More like family assistance." "I see." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the view of the city while I collected my thoughts. "So you want me to give you $200,000 as a gift, with no expectation of repayment?" "When you put it that way, it sounds cold," Ryan protested. "We're family. We've hit a rough patch. You're in a position to help." I turned back to face them. "Where were you when I needed help? When Dad dismissed my work without even giving it a fair review? When I asked for a professional reference?" "That was different," Ryan insisted, his face flushing. "Business is business." "Yes, and apparently family is family only when you need something from me." Amber's expression shifted from pleading to hostile with remarkable speed. "This is exactly why Dad always said you didn't understand how family works. You're keeping score like some kind of accountant instead of helping blood relatives in need." "I'm not keeping score," I replied evenly. "I'm establishing that our relationship has never been based on mutual support. You've actively undermined me at every opportunity. You coined the nickname Thrift Store Girl and used it to mock me for years. Why would I give you money now?" Ryan's demeanor changed, a calculating look replacing his earlier earnestness. "Because if you don't, people will know what kind of person you really are. The cold-hearted Reynolds daughter who abandoned her family when they needed her, who let her parents lose their home, who refused to help her own sister after a devastating divorce. Are you threatening to damage my reputation if I don't give you money?" I asked, genuinely surprised by his directness. "Not threatening," he countered. "Just pointing out that stories travel in this industry. The wrong narrative about you could cause problems at Westlake. And elsewhere," Amber added. "Remember those embarrassing photos from your goth phase in high school? Or the time you got drunk at Cousin Emily's wedding and threw up in the rose bushes?" I saved lots of memories over the years. I stared at them, these strangers who shared my blood, threatening me with public humiliation if I didn't finance their lifestyle. In that moment, Any lingering sense of familial obligation dissolved completely. Without a word, I walked to my desk, picked up my phone, and tapped the screen a few times. "What are you doing?" Ryan demanded. "Sending myself the recording of this conversation," I replied, turning my phone to show them the active recording app. California is a two-party consent state for recordings, but my building's lease agreement includes explicit consent to security monitoring in all common areas, including audio recording in private units for security purposes. "You consented when you signed in downstairs." Their faces went pale nearly simultaneously. "You recorded us?" Amber whispered. "I record all unexpected visits as a security precaution," I said, which wasn't entirely true, but they didn't need to know that. "I now have documented evidence of you attempting to extort money from me with threats of character assassination and public humiliation." "We were just talking," Ryan backpedaled quickly. "Family discussions get heated sometimes." "Yes, they do," I agreed. "And this particular discussion is now over. I'll be emailing a copy of this recording to our family lawyer with instructions to send you both a formal cease and desist letter regarding any attempts to damage my professional reputation or publish materials intended to embarrass me." I walked to the door and opened it, my expression neutral but resolute. "I wish you both well, but our relationship can't continue under these circumstances. Please don't contact me again unless it's through legal counsel." They left without further argument, Amber nearly in tears, Ryan rigid with fury. As I closed the door behind them, I felt an unexpected lightness, as if I'd finally set down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for years. The family that had never accepted me for who I was had finally revealed their true nature so completely that even my lingering sense of obligation couldn't survive it. I called my grandmother that evening to warn her about what had transpired. "They came to you for money," she said, making it a statement rather than a question. "And when you refused, they threatened you. You don't sound surprised. Desperate people rarely show their best qualities, Mackenzie. And your siblings have never had much practice at handling adversity." "I feel like I should feel guilty, but I don't," I admitted. "Does that make me cold?" "No, dear. It makes you honest. With them and with yourself." Her voice was gentle but firm. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for others is to stop enabling their worst behaviors. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the chapter of my life defined by seeking my family's approval or validation was finally, definitively closed. Whatever came next would be entirely on my own terms. 3 months after the confrontation with my siblings, I received the call I had been dreading. My grandmother Eleanor had passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82. Despite our preparations, her health had been gradually declining. The news hit me with unexpected force. She had been my last real connection to the Reynolds family, the only one who had ever truly seen and accepted me. The funeral was a subdued affair compared to the elaborate social events my family had once hosted. I kept my distance from my parents and siblings during the service, acknowledging them with polite nods but avoiding any private conversation. I had taken a week off work to help settle my grandmother's affairs, knowing that the reading of her will was scheduled for the day after the funeral. We gathered in the office of James Mercer, the family attorney who had managed my grandmother's legal matters for decades. My parents sat stiffly on one side of the conference table, Ryan and Amber on the other. I took a seat at the far end, maintaining both literal and figurative distance. Eleanor was very specific about her wishes. Mr. Mercer began after the standard preliminaries. She updated her will most recently 6 months ago and was, as always, of sound mind and clear intention. He proceeded to outline the distribution of my grandmother's modest estate. Her liquid assets, approximately $300,000 in savings and investments, were to be divided equally among her 4 grandchildren, Ryan, Amber, myself, and our cousin Thomas, who lived abroad. Her house had already been sold when she moved to assisted living, with those proceeds used to fund her care. The surprise came when Mr. Mercer reached the portion of the will addressing her personal possessions. "To my granddaughter Mackenzie," he read, "I leave my entire collection of vintage and estate jewelry, with the exception of the specific pieces designated below for other family members." My mother's sharp intake of breath broke the silence. The jewelry collection was the most valuable part of my grandmother's estate. Pieces collected over decades, some passed down through generations. Several were from notable designers like Tiffany and Cartier, dating back to the Art Deco period. The collection had been appraised some years ago at over $800,000. "There must be some mistake," my father said immediately. "Eleanor always intended those pieces to stay with the primary family line." Mr. Mercer looked up from the document. "There is no mistake, Richard. Eleanor was exceptionally clear about this bequest." "It's disproportionate," Amber protested. "Why would Grandma give the most valuable part of her estate to Mackenzie when she has barely been part of the family these past few years?" Mr. Mercer cleared his throat. "Eleanor left a personal letter for Mackenzie that might address your concerns. However, that letter is private unless Mackenzie chooses to share it." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandmother's elegant script. I slipped it into my bag without opening it, not wanting to share whatever message she had left me with the people who had repeatedly betrayed my trust. "We'll contest this," Ryan announced. "It's obviously the result of undue influence during grandmother's illness." Mr. Mercer shook his head. "I would strongly advise against that course of action." Eleanor anticipated such a response and documented her decision-making process thoroughly. Additionally, contesting the will would trigger a clause directing that any challenging party's share be donated to charity instead. The meeting concluded shortly thereafter with arrangements made for the distribution of assets. I was to meet with my grandmother's estate trustee the following day to formalize the transfer of the jewelry collection. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I finally opened my grandmother's letter. Inside was a single sheet of her personal stationery, covered in her distinctive handwriting. "My dearest Mackenzie, if you're reading this, I've finally gone to join your grandfather, which is long overdue in my opinion. Don't waste too many tears on me. I've had a full life and am ready for whatever comes next. I'm leaving you my jewelry collection for 2 reasons. First, because you are the only one who ever showed genuine interest in its history and craftsmanship rather than its monetary value. You would sit with me for hours as a child, listening to stories about each piece, while your siblings were busy counting their potential inheritance. Second, because I know about the anonymous donation that paid for my treatment 3 years ago. The hospital administrator was an old friend who felt I had the right to know who my benefactor truly was. Your generosity saved my life and gave me these extra years, yet you never sought credit or gratitude. I also know how your family has treated you. The dismissal of your talents, the mockery of your choices, the attempts to control you when they finally suspected your success. I've watched you build yourself without their support or approval, and I could not be prouder. The jewelry is yours to do with as you please. Sell it, wear it, or lock it away. The choice is yours without obligation or expectation. Just know that each piece carries stories of strong women who define themselves rather than accepting the definitions others tried to impose. You are the best of the Reynolds legacy, though they may never recognize it. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. I folded the letter carefully, tears blurring my vision. Even in death, she had found a way to acknowledge what no one else in the family had been willing to see. The next morning, I met with the estate trustee, who provided an updated inventory of the jewelry collection. As he reviewed the list, I noticed discrepancies between it and the appraisal document I had been given. Several pieces seemed to be missing, I noted, comparing the documents. The Art Deco diamond and sapphire bracelet from Cartier, the emerald drop earrings, and the Victorian ruby brooch aren't on the current inventory. The trustee looked uncomfortable. Yes, well, there were some adjustments to the collection in recent months. According to our records, those pieces were sold approximately 3 weeks before your grandmother's passing. Sold? By whom? My grandmother was in assisted living with limited mobility. She couldn't have arranged sales independently. After some reluctant explanation, the truth emerged. My parents had been granted limited power of attorney for financial matters during my grandmother's final months. They had apparently used this authority to sell several of the most valuable pieces from the collection before her death, and thus before the will could take effect. The final betrayal cut deeper than I expected. Not content to respect her wishes even in death, they had effectively stolen from her while she was too weak to prevent it. I arranged to collect the remaining jewelry the following day and then made one last visit to my parents' rented house. the confrontation I had been avoiding for years. They were surprised to see me on their doorstep, but invited me in with artificial pleasantry, as if our relationship were merely strained rather than fundamentally broken. "I know about the jewelry," I said, without preamble once we were seated in their living room. "The pieces you sold before Grandma died." The momentary flicker in my mother's expression confirmed my suspicion before she composed herself. "I don't know what you're talking about. The Cartier bracelet, the emerald earrings, the ruby brooch, all missing from the collection, all sold in the 3 weeks before Grandma's death. When you had power of attorney, if certain pieces were liquidated, it was for your grandmother's care and comfort," my father interjected smoothly. "The facility was expensive, and her resources were limited. Her care was fully funded through next year," I countered. "The trustee confirmed that. You stole from her, knowing she intended those pieces for me." "That's an outrageous accusation," my mother snapped, her facade of politeness cracking. "We would know." "I have the sales records," I interrupted, which wasn't entirely true. I had confirmation of the sales, but not yet documentation of who had authorized them. "And I have Grandma's letter explaining exactly why she left the collection to me." My father's expression hardened. "What do you want, Mackenzie? Money? Is that why you're here, making these wild accusations?" "I want the truth," I replied. "Just once. I want you both to be honest with me, and with yourselves, about how you've treated me." The silence that followed was heavy with decades of unacknowledged reality. My mother looked away, examining the pattern of the carpet with sudden interest. My father stared at me, his jaw tense. "We've always wanted what's best for you," he finally said, his voice strained. "No, you wanted what would reflect best on you." The words flowed now, years of suppressed truth-finding release. "You never saw me. Not really. You saw a disappointing extension of yourselves who refused to play the role you assigned." "We gave you every advantage," my mother protested weakly. "You gave me things, lessons, clothes, superficial opportunities, but you never gave me support, never believed in my abilities, or respected my choices." "Because your choices were deliberately contrary," my father countered, anger rising in his voice. "You rejected everything we valued, everything we built. The thrift store clothes, the technological obsessions, it was all calculated rebellion." "It wasn't rebellion, it was authenticity. I lived according to my values instead of pretending to be something I wasn't. And for that, you labeled me difficult, ungrateful, financially naive." "Well, we were clearly wrong about that last part," my mother said bitterly. "Apparently you've been quite successful without our guidance." "Yes," I acknowledged simply. "I have been." "How successful exactly?" my father asked, his tone shifting subtly. The financier in him couldn't resist the question, even now. I considered the moment, weighing the consequences of full disclosure against the satisfaction of finally being seen. This was the crossroads I had been approaching for years. The moment when I would either continue hiding my success or use it as the ultimate vindication. I reached into my bag and retrieved my phone. Opening my investment portfolio app, I placed it on the coffee table between us, the screen displaying my current net worth, $9,207,643.18. "This is what your financially naive daughter has built," I said quietly. "While you were mocking my thrift store clothes and dismissing my ideas, I was building this. Entirely on my own terms, without your connections or your approval." The stunned silence that followed was exactly as I had imagined it would be. My mother's eyes widened almost comically, while my father seemed frozen, staring at the number on the screen as if it might be an illusion. 9 million? My mother finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "And change," I confirmed, reclaiming my phone. "My algorithm, the one Dad dismissed as amateur, has outperformed market benchmarks by an average of 23% annually for 8 years. Why didn't you tell us?" my father asked, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have found a way to dismiss this success too? Or worse, tried to control it, like you attempted with the family business investment scheme?" Neither could meet my eyes. the truth of my assessment hanging in the air between us. I didn't come here for reconciliation, I continued, rising to my feet. I came because I wanted you to finally see me clearly, just once. I also wanted to let you know that I'm aware of what you did with Grandma's jewelry, and while I could pursue legal action, I've decided not to. Consider it the last obligation of family that I intend to honor. As I moved toward the door, my father suddenly spoke, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. Mackenzie, wait. Perhaps we could start again, now that we understand your capabilities. I turned back, taking in the scene. My parents in their rented house, surrounded by the remnants of their former luxury, suddenly seeing me as valuable now that they knew my net worth. That's the problem, I replied gently. You still don't understand. My worth isn't in that number on the screen. It never was. With those words, I left, closing the door on the family that had never truly been mine. I'm back where this story began, sitting in my parents' rented house during that fateful family gathering, staring at my investment app while my sister Amber's gasp draws everyone's attention to my phone screen. $9 million? She whispers, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. That can't be right. Every head turns our way. My father stands abruptly, moving around the table with unexpected speed. Let me see that, he demands. But I calmly lock my phone and slip it into my pocket. It's exactly right, I confirm, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. $9,207,643.18, to be precise. The room erupts in overlapping voices. There must be some mistake. How could you possibly? Why wouldn't you tell us? I raise my hand, and surprisingly, they fall silent. There's no mistake. My algorithm, the same one you dismissed without consideration, Dad, has been remarkably successful. Combined with disciplined investing and compound growth, it's built substantial wealth. My mother recovers first, her social training kicking in as she forces a bright smile. Darling, this is wonderful news. We always knew you were clever with numbers. Did you? I ask mildly. I seem to recall being told I lacked financial acumen and would never understand money like a Reynolds should. My father shifts uncomfortably. That was clearly a misunderstanding. Perhaps if you'd been more forthcoming about your activities. Perhaps if you'd shown any genuine interest in my work or respect for my choices, I might have been, I counter. Ryan, ever the opportunist, slides into the chair beside me. This is incredible, Mac. We should talk about potential synergies. I've been developing a new investment concept that would pair perfectly with your algorithmic approach. Amber's transformation is equally swift. I always defended your thrift store thing to my friends. Mackenzie's just being eco-conscious, I'd tell them. So ahead of your time. I look around at my family. The same people who had mocked, dismissed, and attempted to manipulate me for years, now looking at me with newfound respect and interest. Not because they suddenly appreciated my character or recognized my intelligence, but simply because I had the one thing they truly valued: money. I stand up slowly, gathering my things. I think it's time for me to go. Already? My mother protests. But we've barely had time to process this wonderful news. I've given you a decade to see me for who I am, I reply. You chose not to until you saw a number on a screen. That tells me everything I need to know about our relationship. Now wait just a minute, my father begins, his tone oscillating between authority and placation. Family is more important than old misunderstandings. We should discuss how we move forward from here. I agree that we need to define our relationship going forward, I say, but it needs to be based on mutual respect, not financial interest. Of course we respect you, Amber insists. We're family. Respect isn't something you suddenly discover when someone has something you want, I explain quietly. It's consistent recognition of another person's dignity, choices, and boundaries, even when you disagree with them. I look at each of them in turn. My father, struggling to reconcile his dismissal of me with the evidence of my success. My mother, calculating the social capital of having a multi-millionaire daughter. My siblings, already planning how they might benefit from my wealth. I'm not shutting the door completely, I continue. But any relationship we have going forward will need to be built on new terms. I won't fund lifestyles or bail out poor decisions. I won't be manipulated by family obligation or social pressure. And I absolutely won't tolerate any more mockery or dismissal of my choices. The silence that follows is heavy with the recognition that the power dynamic has irrevocably shifted. For the first time in my life, I'm setting the terms of my relationship with my family rather than struggling to meet their expectations. So that's it? My father finally asks. You're dictating terms now? No, Dad. I'm establishing boundaries, something I should have done years ago. I leave without further drama, driving back to my condo with a strange sense of lightness. The secret that had both protected and isolated me was finally in the open. Whatever happened next would happen on my terms. In the 6 months since that day, my relationship with my family has evolved into something I never expected. A careful, tentative respect. Not warmth or closeness. Too much damage had been done for that. But a mutual recognition of boundaries and autonomy. My parents no longer comment on my clothing or lifestyle choices. My siblings have stopped attempting to leverage our relationship for financial gain after I made it clear that such efforts would result in complete estrangement. We interact at family functions with polite distance, like friendly acquaintances rather than intimate relations. I've found greater fulfillment in building my own community. I established a scholarship fund for young women in finance and technology, focusing particularly on candidates from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in these fields. I joined the board of a nonprofit teaching financial literacy to low-income communities. I even started mentoring several promising data scientists at Westlake, finding satisfaction in helping others develop their potential. Last week, I had dinner with Mr. Abernathy, my father's former colleague, who had been the only one to recognize the value of my algorithm years ago. Now retired, he shared stories about my grandmother that I'd never heard, how she had faced similar struggles in her youth, how she had managed family money behind the scenes when my grandfather's investments faltered, never taking credit but quietly ensuring the family's financial stability. Your grandmother saw herself in you, he told me over dessert. The same quiet determination, the same clear-eyed view of value versus appearance. I wish I'd known that part of her story while she was alive, I said. She thought you needed to find your own path without her influence, he replied. She wanted you to know your success was entirely your own. As I drive home from that dinner, I find myself thinking about the true nature of wealth. Not the number in my investment account, impressive as it might be, but the freedom it represents. The ability to define my own success, to make choices based on my values rather than others' expectations, to help those who might otherwise be overlooked. This morning, I mentored a young woman named Sarah who recently joined Westlake's analytics team. She arrived wearing a beautifully structured blazer that I recognized as vintage 1972 Yves Saint Laurent, probably purchased for under $50 at a good thrift store. I complimented it specifically, and she lit up, launching into an enthusiastic explanation of her sustainable fashion philosophy. As I listened, I saw something of myself in her. The intelligence, the independence, the willingness to define success on her own terms. But unlike my younger self, she won't have to hide her light or downplay her talents to make others comfortable. Not in my department, not under my mentorship. That, I think, is the greatest wealth of all. Not just breaking free from others' limiting perceptions ourselves, but creating spaces where others never have to experience those limitations in the first place. So, what do you think? Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you the most? Has anyone ever made you feel like an outsider for making choices that went against their expectations? Share your experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories of proving the doubters wrong. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more authentic content about building success on your own terms. Remember, your worth isn't defined by others' perceptions or by the numbers in your bank account. It's defined by the integrity with which you live your values every single day. Thank you for listening to my journey from Thrift Store Girl to financial independence. I'm grateful to each of you for being part of this community where we can share our truths and grow stronger together.